I want to tell you about an event we're hosting before we begin. For those of you in Seattle, we are hosting a relaunch party for the Appetite at Gibran, a boutique on Phinney Ridge in Seattle. Join us Friday, November 16th from 4 to 8 for drinks, food, shopping, and talking with us, the Appetite crew, at this local shop owned by former NFL player Gibran Hamdan. The event will be a fundraiser for Elizabeth Ayuku's film, Me Little Me, currently being filmed, about the myths surrounding who suffers from eating disorders. Learn more on our website, opalfoodandbody.com/events, and all over our social media at Opal Food and Body, both Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We look forward to seeing you there. Hi, and welcome to The Appetite, a podcast all about food, body, sport, and mental health. Brought to you by Opal Food and Body Wisdom, an eating disorder treatment program in Seattle, Washington. This podcast is all about bringing the themes of our work as clinicians into a wider conversation. Today, we've got the honor of having licensed marriage and family therapist Arlene Thomas here. Arlene is actually a colleague and old friend of Kara's. So today, we've got Kara Bazzi and myself interviewing Arlene in the studio, joining us in the conversation around grief. In our last episode, we had a bit more of a roundtable talking about processes of grief and how to understand it within the eating disorder world. But today, Arlene's going to be telling us about her story of profound loss and how she has integrated her own experiences into her work as a therapist.
I'm Kara Bazzi. I'm the clinical director at Opal, and I'm very happy to be bringing my friend on the episode this morning, Arlene Thomas, who's also a therapist. Arlene and I met in graduate school, and we started school 2002 to 2004, so we've been friends for a long time. And I really wanted to bring her into this conversation because of her powerful story around grief.
Hi, I'm Arlene Thomas, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist practicing in Redmond, Washington, so on the east side of Seattle. Like Kara said, I've been in the field of therapy for about 14 years, and I see a lot of people around issues of grief and loss, among other things.
Thank you, Arlene. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks.
So I'd love to just get a sense of kind of what brings you into this conversation in particular, which I know is particularly your story.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about kind of who you are in the realms of grief.
Yeah. So when I was starting to think about a career in marriage and family therapy, I didn't necessarily know what specific direction it was going to take me. But during the course of specifically my graduate school experience, so I was in my mid-20s. And so starting at the beginning of graduate school, and then about 3.5 years later, so within a 3.5 year period of time, I had 4 major losses in my life. When I started graduate school, my mom had previously been diagnosed with cancer and was at sort of the tail end of her life and her fight with that. So actually, within 4 weeks of starting graduate school, she ended up passing away from cancer. During that time, my dad also had a diagnosis of cancer.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So during that time, we knew he was sick. He was getting treatment for that still. But right after, or quickly after my mom passed away, he kind of moved on emotionally. And he got married pretty quickly after that. So during that phase of time, it's almost like I lost him emotionally and sort of had just that loss of relationship with him. At the end of graduate school, so about a year and a half after my mom had died, he quickly and unexpectedly passed away before I got the chance for any kind of emotional closure with him. So it's almost like I lost him emotionally, then I lost him physically. And with that, at the time, it felt like I lost any chance of having closure. When my dad died, he didn't know, and almost nobody knew, but I was very newly pregnant. So even at his funeral, I had the sense of saying goodbye to one generation, but there was still sort of a sense of hope for another. So it was with a lot of mixed emotions kind of during that season of my life.
And this was the first time you were pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it was very well thought out. My husband and I wanted to be married 5 years, be done with graduate school. So we had like a sense of kind of control of life and how we wanted our lives to be and kind of what those dreams were going to look like. So November, after my dad died, so this was, 7-8 months later, we were ending a healthy pregnancy. Everything was looking great. Our son, Micah, was born, and he was healthy, happy, adorable. And we took him home from the hospital, so clean bill of health, nothing was wrong. And that first night at home, he died unexpectedly from sudden infant death syndrome. So just a shocking loss for us.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to blow my nose.
Yeah, that's great.
See, this is part of what I learned in grief is to you can blow your nose in front of other people.
It's necessary to move forward with the next thing.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So after the losses of both my mom and dad, I felt like I kind of knew how to do grief. And I was a therapist at that time. So I really knew how to do grief.
Will you tell me what that means?
I knew the importance of processing emotion along the way and creating room and space and permission to just feel the feelings. And I knew the value of working through that rather than trying to rush the process or ignore it. So, and even I remember, so after someone dies and you go to a funeral home, you're given this, or at least the ones that we went to, we were given these black notebooks with estate planning stuff and just kind of what to expect in the process. And I remember at one time, we were moving and he was like, I already have 2 of these.
Wow.
So it's almost like even the physical representation of I've already gone through this. So yeah, so I knew how to do grief, but this felt just totally different. So some of the things that were sort of coping tools before just felt like they weren't available to me anymore. So things like making meaning from loss. At the time, it just felt too fresh, and any meaning that was made wouldn't have been worth the pain of it. My personal faith perspective was something that helped me through those other losses. And for a long time, that just felt, again, like it was a tool that I couldn't use on this one. So I felt a real loss of dreams, a loss of an ability to hope in the future, because hope makes you vulnerable, and you're just vulnerable for more loss if you hope.
And there had been so much hope already with Micah.
Yeah, so many specific dreams around him and his life, which seemed like safe dreams to have.
Yeah.
So a few months after we lost Micah, we knew that we wanted to still be parents. And I always felt like there was 2 holes left after we lost him. One was the loss of him specifically, and then the other was a loss of wanting that desire to be parents. Mm-hmm. So we decided to start trying again, which was very scary for us. And a few months later, we found out we were pregnant, which we were cautiously optimistic about. It did provide some sense of, okay, there is some good here. 9 weeks into that pregnancy, we went in for a routine ultrasound, or I guess not necessarily routine, it was early. And after previously hearing a heartbeat, there was no heartbeat in that ultrasound. So we knew we were in the midst of losing this baby too. And that experience was just, I became numb And that was almost like just a desperate, like despair experience for both my husband and I. The ways that I had grieved previously with kind of that intentionality and I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I should do. I know what's helpful to do in terms of grief. By the time we had that loss, it just felt numb to me. And we later found out because of testing that baby was a little girl who we decided to name Morgan. So, and it's always in this point of my sharing my grief story that I feel like, gosh, am I overwhelming other people? Not only is there a sense of it's still overwhelming to speak it all out loud in one segment of time.
For you, it feels like a lot.
Yeah. Because it is that recognition of like, oh my gosh, like that was a lot, to say the least.
And this is all within like 4 or 5 years, you said?
Yeah, 3.5 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And all in my mid-20s. So, so I didn't have a lot of people around me who had deaths in their family, let alone kind of the magnitude of those deaths. And each of them were so different. I felt like with my mom, there's a slow goodbye with her, and the ability to kind of grieve along the way, and say goodbye along the way. And in a weird sense, when she did die, there was a sense of relief. And I remember feeling so bad about having that relief of just knowing she wasn't suffering anymore, knowing kind of how the story ended, because there was a season of time when I didn't know when I was going to get the next phone call that she was worse. I didn't know when she was going to take a dip. I didn't know, just the next bad news that was going to happen. And I actually remember going back so that was at the beginning of my grad school experience. I went back to school sometime later, and one of our professors actually was just kind of checking in with me, and he asked, is there a sense of relief? And I remember just feeling relieved that he even gave permission for that feeling.
Yeah, that's not something that I think people feel like they're allowed to feel
totally,
when they're experiencing something so huge and horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. So with my mom, there was this gradual sense of goodbye and grief. With my dad, it at the time, it felt like with the emotional loss, like at the time, it felt like a chosen loss, like something that could have been avoided. And, I'm 15 years out from that experience. And now I can definitely have more grace and understanding of potentially what his experience was like. And I think because of his own family of origin experiences, as well as his cultural upbringing, both my parents were Puerto Rican, and not only being Puerto Rican, but being a Puerto Rican man, and also just different family of origin experiences for him. I don't think he had the tools to know how to grieve. So people often talk about the different stages of grief. And for me, those were definitely prevalent, but I also think about just the different experiences of grief and how each of them touched on different types of losses.
I remember, Arlene, specifically when, as your friend, being your friend at the time of Micah's loss and the miscarriage, I remember you specifically saying, like, I want people to ask me questions, because I think there was so many people that didn't know how to engage you or didn't know how to talk about it. And I'm always going to remember you saying like that. I want people to ask.
Yeah.
And that felt like something, that we could respond to as your friend, of just moving towards you.
Yeah.
And all of it.
Yeah. There was definitely what felt like secondary losses with relationships, with people who maybe didn't know what to say, how to say it, but then also with people who I feel like in order to engage from a place of any kind of empathy, like you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I felt like for some people, for whatever reason, and again, hindsight now, for whatever reason, they weren't able to. So whether that's past experiences for themselves kind of maybe an inability to integrate their worldview into the reality that these kinds of losses and this magnitude of loss could happen. But yeah, for whatever reason, there were these secondary losses of relationships where people weren't able to engage in that. Which is really sad. Really hard.
It's really sad. Do you remember what kinds of questions you would have wanted people to ask?
I don't know that there were specific questions that I would have wanted people to ask as much as sort of a stance of just being open to listen and be present, honestly, in the darkness rather than trying to find meaning too quickly.
Yeah.
Or find hope too quickly. And I think the idea that we have sympathy cards rather than empathy cards,
wow.
Like sympathy, I will from a distance say, oh, that sucks to be you. But rather than the empathy of, gosh, let me try to understand what this experience was like for you. And let me fumble around and ask for forgiveness if I have offended you. But let me at least engage in the conversation rather than kind of create that distance.
Yeah.
And as you began fumbling yourself through it, in retrospect, can you see sort of what and how that wound up looking?
I think I got to a place, it was small steps along the way. Because eventually I did start hoping again in small doses. I do actually have 2 healthy daughters now. And the process of even getting to the idea of trying to have children again was terrifying. But ultimately I think I knew I wanted to have hope again, but it was just too scary to hold that at the beginning, at least in broad chunks. Broad chunks is not a word. But in small ways, I started hoping again. I think the process of, especially my pregnancy with Macy, since she was my first after the miscarriage, I was anxiety ridden pretty much the whole time. But I also knew that I wanted to commit to her. And I wanted to I wanted to commit to hope again.
Wow.
And I think that's part of sort of what ended up being the meaning making for me of, in many ways, I felt like I was honoring the lives of my 2 lost children by making the decision to just be vulnerable. And whether or not Macy would have made it here healthily, I wanted to be committed to her. I feel like I am now a different parent because of my experiences with Micah and Morgan. And I feel like I'm honoring them by sort of continuing to live and continuing to hope and dream. And now in the work that I do, their experiences are so integral to the ways that I sit with other people. And when I sit with other, parents who've lost children or other clients who are dealing with grief, I do feel like it's a way of honoring my experiences of all those losses. And in a way that creates meaning for me. It's not worth any of the pain. I always joke that if I could have chosen, I would way rather be a less empathetic, more naive person and have my kids here. Yeah. But I'm not offered that choice. So since I'm not offered that choice, I do want to honor that experience by recognizing the ways that I've been changed as a person.
I think that's so striking because I love how you're not saying in any way, like, I can make meaning out of this. I love that you're refusing to do that. That there may be some things that have happened because of what's happened, that here you are. It's a different reality.
Right.
But not, oh,
this is why it happened.
This is why, or now I'm able to do this better, or anything like that, which, maybe you are more empathetic, but you want your children.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's been a cost to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm really touched by hearing you say that, Arlene.
Thanks.
When you say you're sitting with your clients in a particular way now, tell me about how you even maybe are leading other people through their grief.
Yeah.
What does that look like tangibly?
I think creating the time and space and permission for them to feel whatever they're going to feel, and having a sense of comfort is the wrong word, but not being uncomfortable with that is maybe a different approach to that. I think also about the idea of hope. And I think that my role as a clinician is to hold on to hope, especially while waiting for my clients to be able to take that hope. So many times I'm silently holding on to hope for them. And I'm not assigning hope, or I'm not saying that I'm not rushing them through the process of holding that hope. I'm just silently holding it for them until they're ready to hold it themselves. And sometimes that takes longer than some people are comfortable with. And sometimes people are able to get there sooner.
So last week we talked a lot about ritual on the podcast, and Lexi shared a little bit of her story of participating in a ritual around grief. In your story, I'm feeling like so drawn to the fact that it just sounded like chaos, and that like having probably some particular ritual was really not something you could focus on.
Yeah.
Does that feel true?
Yeah, it felt like almost like a domino effect. Like the first loss I can kind of make meaning of, we had been losing my mom for years. And then it was just whenever I felt like I could sort of gain a little momentum, get my footing again, I was just knocked down again. And it felt heavier every time. So yeah, whenever I felt like I could gain a little bit of stability, it was just ripped again. Yeah, so there wasn't necessarily time or space to kind of create rituals that would even kind of work for the next loss, because every loss was different. So I think that what ended up kind of helping me and my husband, and eventually our family, was looking at ways to integrate our stories of losses into our healthy family. And this looked many different ways. It continues to look many different ways. When I was pregnant with Micah, we had his room completely decorated. It was ready for him. It was decorated in all baseball caricatures of Babe Ruth and just Jackie Robinson and all the classic baseball figures. So the symbol of a baseball ended up being really meaningful for us. So whenever I saw a baseball itself, or it made me think of Micah. So now, if you were to come to our house, you would think we love baseball, which we do. But probably not to the extent that it looks like it. In every family picture that we take, we incorporate a baseball.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah, it's been really meaningful. And now as our girls are getting older, I mean, they know about Micah. They know why we represent him through baseballs. The people who are close to us know this when they see our family pictures every year. So it's meaningful for us, and to kind of people who maybe don't know our story. Again, it probably just looks like, Thomas's love of baseball. So that's one way of just kind of being able to integrate him into our lives. And there are different ways too of just kind of incorporating different celebrations, remembering.
The bench in Kirkland?
Yeah. So one of my close friends after these series of losses, and especially around Micah, she had asked people to, our friends and community of support to donate money to this bench. So we actually, we have a bench on the, or a picnic table on the Kirkland waterfront that has a plaque commemorated to him. So for us, it's like almost it is a different place other than the cemetery where he's buried, where we can go and think of him while doing life too. So so 1 year our family pictures were at this table, and we'll go there periodically with our girls and picnic and think of what could have been.
Mm-hmm. Again, I'm so struck by you like incorporating rather than moving through.
Yeah.
Like that, I think that there's language in our society to talk about like moving forward.
Yeah.
Move forward. You are able to take something in and process it. Process it as if it's a machine that you ingest and it does its work, and then you come out the other side.
Yeah, I think about the idea of moving forward without moving on. Mm-hmm. And for me, they're slightly different, but yeah, the idea that we can still be healthy, but still hold on to these important stories in our lives as well.
Arlene, I know you said like each loss kind of has it's a different type of loss. Is there a different type of incorporation too? Like, I guess I haven't asked you before about, is there a way that you incorporate your mom in the day-to-day? And I don't think I know that.
Yeah. And that's looked different through the years. Like at first it was more personal. Like when there would just be these moments when I was, driving in my car on the way from graduate school and thinking, gosh, I think she would be proud of me. Or what would she think? So there's these moments where I'm just kind of drawing her in. Now with my girls, we've started cooking Puerto Rican food together. And when we do this, we'll tell stories about her. Bringing up those memories of her. And thankfully my husband we were married when before she died. So he has a relationship with her as well. So even being able to, for the both of us to bring in stories of her has been more recently really meaningful to us. Yeah. So I think that integration does look different for those different types of losses.
That sounds so important to actually maintain, not just like the bringing in of these stories or these parts of you, but also to be able to move forward as an integrated person. That feels like some of the subtext there, that you're able to not kind of amputate that part of you.
Right. Which is so important.
Yes.
Gosh, because I think that would feel, again, like a secondary loss. Like I was just leaving these important people and these important stories behind.
Yeah. Based off of your experiences, I'd love to hear kind of what you experienced as maybe even societal pressures around how to participate or experience your grief.
Yeah. Well, I think we touched on one of them a little bit earlier, the idea of trying to jump towards meaning making too quickly in the process. And then one thing that I heard a lot of was people commenting on how strong I was. And I assume that's because I was still living. I was still walking around and breathing, and my heart was beating, and I was eating and getting out of bed. But many people would say things like, gosh, you're so strong. I'm not sure that I could handle the same thing. And I mean, again, with hindsight, like I get maybe a little bit of what they were trying to convey, but in some ways that made me feel the pressure of that strength. That I needed to be strong, but it also made me feel like, gosh, I don't have a choice here. Like my heart keeps beating. I got to get up in the morning. So that was a message that was kind of difficult for me. Another one was this idea of getting back to normal. People expected, I think many people, when they think about healing from grief, whatever that means, there's this expectation that, once you're back to normal, then you've kind of processed things in a healthy way. But for so many people, after a loss, like we're changed.
Yeah, you're a different person.
Yeah. So it's a new normal.
That makes me think of what you said about the secondary losses that happen in relationships during this period of grief, that, maybe it sounds like there would be relationships that change through all of that, but then also just ways of being in the world that change.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of grieve a different way of
Right.
the way that you were living, the way that you were relating.
Totally.
And who you are is not the same person that you have become through all of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was struck by when you were just talking about the idea of people telling you like, oh, you're so strong. I was just actually feeling physically in my body, like the intensity of what it would be like to walk in the world with that much loss happening at the same time. And for people to then say that when, I don't know, I think about that in a way that would be crushing, or your body would feel weak, or your body would feel something. So I want to know kind of what your body felt like during that time too, if you can remember.
Yeah. I got physically sick so much during that first year, especially after we lost Micah. I had colds once a month.
Wow.
So there was just like a fatigue. There was like almost like a to the bone fatigue. At the end of days, at the end of every day, it was just a feeling of like emotional exhaustion and physical exhaustion as well, and just heavy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're in your loss, and you're dealing with I just remember all the people. All the people you're having to interact with, and kind of all the comments they're making. And I remember that being such a big part of your process was just navigating all of the
social dynamics.
Yeah, the social dynamics.
Yeah, in some ways it was, I remember we were living in a small condo in Woodinville, and it just felt like such a safe cocoon for us. And so that did become a really safe space. But then I had to eventually go back to work and interact with other people, and that's needed. But it was that was a different experience around that process too. That was tiring. Tiring in, maybe that's not the right word. So that was a part of the process that had its own challenges,
right, its own part to it.
As well as the benefits of those relationships where it felt like, I can be honest here, and you're okay with me being in this dark space and not jumping to the silver lining. And I did have those relationships which were so meaningful and so powerful during that time.
And also, I mean, one thing that stands out too from that time is I know it probably wasn't always had ease, but Ben and your husband Ben and you really seemed to kind of be able to hold each other in that, or like have it wasn't, you weren't turning against each other. Like the process of grief seemed to be I don't even know what words to put to it, but
I think we allowed for that space for one another to. Yeah, I remember after my mom died, I was in. So I would come home. My husband would just kind of ask how things were, and he would just like let me have 20 minutes to just tell him all the things I was feeling, and he was so great. Like he would just kind of listen, and he didn't have to respond a lot, but just like allow that space. And then after that chunk of time, he'd be like, do you want to watch Friends? Yes, please. So in some ways, like allowed this segue of, I'm going to go here emotionally and just sort of dump, but we're going to have this segue, and we're going to have this self-care. Because I think for a lot of people, there is this fear of opening up that door because it feels like you're going to be derailed for the rest of the night. And that's one of the practical things I encourage clients with is kind of allow that space, and also think about transitions that you can have afterwards, like going for a walk, watching something on TV, like doing something that just allows for that segue in a healthy way.
Yeah, I was going to ask that with the amount that you were feeling in your body, just if your body needed different things during that time.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I really do feel like the extent that we allow ourselves the experience of our pain on the other end of that, we are allowing for those experiences of joy and those positive emotions too.
Mm-hmm. And I do remember that too of, I think when you knew someone could hold the dark, then you could more easily go into the levity and laugh and have humor, which
was needed.
Yeah, I mean, and Arlene's really funny, and she's got lots of good humor. So it feels like there was more of that permission to know that you could do the gamut.
Totally. Yeah.
Mm. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to Jack Straw Cultural Center for sound engineering, to Aaron Davidson for the Appetite's music, and to Large Media. Stay in touch with what's new on the Appetite by subscribing to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. If you have the time, we'd so appreciate it if you'd leave a review of the podcast. This can make it so much easier for others interested in what we're talking about to find access to our podcast. If you have any questions or just want to connect, email us at theappetite@opalfoodandbody.com. or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to stay in touch. Thanks again for listening, and talk to you next time.